we sit here in your White House office down the hall from the President, Mr. Sorensen, I first want to say thank you for shedding your cloak of anonymity briefly while we examine your rather special relationship with the President. Now, you've been described in the things which have been written about you as the President's counsel, his speechwriter, his alter ego, the man closest to him in domestic affairs, and a lot of other things. Are you, in your own mind, all of these things?
Ray, I have been with the President for a long time and try to do the best I can for him in whatever way he asks me to serve.
What is the genesis of your close relationship to the President? How did it begin? What drew you together? Was it the fact that you had the same reaction to a given political situation?
I first went with the President when he came to the Senate in January of 1953. I was attracted then by the vitality which he showed on tackling every subject. What attracted him, I don't know. Perhaps is the fact that he was from Harvard and a well-to-do family and the Eastern Coast and the Catholic Church, and I was none of those things.
Whatever it was, there was an attraction and affinity. You wrote back from the President yesterday after he gave that long speech. I'm wondering, what was his mood? Was it exhilaration? Was it relief? Was there any particular mood?
Well, first of all, it was exhaustion, because he'd been speaking for 50 minutes and he'd been working for the last several weeks on a very difficult speech. But he was, I think, gratified by the response that his program received from the Congress, and confident that he's going to have a good year.
The President, looking back a little, has had many vicissitudes this past year. There was Cuba, his back trouble, Khrushchev, Berlin. The presidency, as we all know, changes men. How would you say it's changed him?
In a personal sense, it's changed him very little. He still has the same energy, determination. He still is able to smile at some of these vicissitudes you mentioned, take a long-range look. But as you say, the presidency educates any man who has a rather unique view from the White House. The world looks very different. And as he himself has said, he's come to learn that there isn't an American solution for every world problem, and we have to do the best we can and not give in every day to some new whim or criticism.
In other words, things look different when you sit in this big chair down the hall than when you're out campaigning.
No doubt about it.
Of the President's various accomplishments of his first year, many of which he touched on yesterday in that speech, what do you think has given him the most satisfaction?
Certainly the most important to the President has been the maintenance of peace without any loss of our security. You'll have to recall that when he came in on January 20, sitting there on his desk was a military deterioration in Laos, an explosive situation in the Congo, time bomb ticking away in Berlin. Later in the year, we had the threat of the peacemaking organization, the UN, being destroyed by a troika or by Red China coming in. We had deteriorating relations with Latin America, as it looked like many more countries would succumb to Castroism or communism. So that there was a chance of the United States either getting into war or losing its security, or seeing the frontiers of freedom being breached all over the world. And from that day on, the President's been working and concerned with the crisis, and in not a single one of them has war broken out or has our security been diminished. They are all, as he said in his speech yesterday, on our unfinished agenda. There's a lot more to do. But I think that's what he gets the most satisfaction out of last year, because the President is a man of peace.
What do you think that he would most like to accomplish this second year?
He gave a long program yesterday. Probably in the domestic side of it, the most important was his plans to provide health insurance for older citizens, because he's aware, as so many others are, that our older people just don't have the money to pay for medical care, and their children and grandchildren don't have the money to support those bills either. There are a lot of other important domestic bills, tax reform, a new farm bill, and others. But probably the issue he gave the most emphasis to in his speech yesterday is the most important in foreign affairs and to the country as a whole, and that's our new trade bill, because that is going to open up a whole new relationship with the Atlantic community and with the world at large.
I'd like to touch on some of the criticisms that have been made of the president. How does he react to criticism generally? Does it bother him?
Well, you might say he's reading more now and enjoying it less. But on the whole, I think there's so many who criticize anyone in a position of power that they become accustomed to it, and he recognizes that's part of the process, part of the game.
What about the charge that he has no grand design, that he works simply on day-to-day strategy with no real appreciation for the long-run position?
I don't think anyone could make that charge after listening to his address yesterday. It certainly wasn't deserved even before then. The President has made it very clear that what we're talking about in foreign affairs is a world community, hopefully beyond the Cold War, where nations are free and independent, can choose whatever system or form of government they want as long as it doesn't hurt the freedom of anyone else. And to achieve that kind of goal, the President's been taking some rather long strides. Last year, his major effort was to effect a fundamental change in our relations with the less developed countries and our new foreign aid program, trying to put that on a long-term basis so that eventually they could stand on their own feet as independent and equal nations. This year, he's again incurring some political risk by making a long-range effort to fundamentally alter our relations with the Western European countries, again to come closer to that goal of a world community. So I think that's a pretty good grand design.
There's the charge of Professor Morgenthau that the President operates too much as a politician, not enough as a statesman, that he doesn't take big risks.
The President took a risk in altering our policy in Laos, which, instead of trying to maintain on the border of China an anti-communist pawn, which was only about to be taken over by the communists, to instead take a risk and try to achieve a truly neutral and independent country and get our policy back in line with the policies of the British and the French. Took a tremendous risk in the Congo in supporting the United Nations policy there. Took a risk, as I mentioned, in our trade bill this year and our aid bill last year. I think if you look at the President's program this year and last year and the number of lobbyists that draws to Washington, you realize that he doesn't always do what's popular.
There's one other charge, and that's a Republican charge that we sometimes hear, that he's a man of appeasement.
He certainly is not a man of appeasement. Everything he's done this year has been to make more precise than ever before the determination of the United States to protect its interests and the interests of freedom. He's increased the budget which had been submitted by Mr. Eisenhower 15% last year, and by an even larger extent this year for the defense of this country. He has made very clear that we're going to stand firm at Berlin or in any other spot of the globe where our security is threatened. I don't think anyone who knows the President, who knows him personally, and his own record in the war, and his concern about this country would ever make the charge of appeasement.
After the Cuban affair, we kept hearing that the President had learned a lot from it. What did he learn from it?
Well, the President has been reluctant, and I should be reluctant, to go into any detail on that situation. There's probably more that will be learned and more that can be said later on. I would just say this, that many mistakes have been made in this country's policy toward Cuba over a great many years. And the President was willing to take responsibility for having made another one this year and permitting this particular operation to go forward. But a nation does learn from its mistakes. And I think we learned something about our personnel and our procedures and some of the premises on which we had been acting up until then. I think we learned something about the difficulties in a democracy of conducting a covert operation. And I think we learned something about how best to deal with threats in this hemisphere. We've been going ahead on the Alliance for Progress, which has done more for Latin America than anything since the Good Neighbor policy.
You have a reputation, if I may say so, as being one of the President's most ardent and eloquent defenders, and I want to say that I think what you have said in the last 15 minutes bears out that reputation. Thank you very much for this insight into the presidency of John F. Kennedy.
Thank you.